Um, I'm sure that you know what it's like to be in a kind of a time of limbo. In some ways, I'm like that at the moment. Zach and Marcel, our youngest son and his wife, were living with us for about a couple of years. But they've moved out recently to house sit for some friends, and we're not quite sure whether they're gone permanently or whether they're likely to come back again. They had a couple of rooms in the house, and one of them is this beautiful room with a lovely view that I've now taken over as my office. If you just go to the next slide, like you can see, it's a pretty nice place. But the difficulty is that I'm not sure whether they're coming back. So I haven't moved all my books in because I don't want to move them all in and then have to move them all out again. And it's kind of a bit of a time of limbo like that. There's many times in life, aren't there, when we're in limbo. I think engagement is a sort of a bit of a time like that. Scott said that he's getting married sort of 6 weeks, is it, mate? Yeah, 6 weeks' time. You know what I mean? It's a bit of a limbo time because you really are committed, you know, and yet it's not quite there yet kind of thing. And it's a bit of a limbo time. I think when you're pregnant with your first baby, it's often a sort of a bit of a limbo time. We've got one that's pregnant at the moment, one of our daughters-in-law, and you know, it's sort of, you know you're going to have a baby, you're committed to that, and yet it's not quite there yet. I just had to that was our first grandson, and I had to fit him into the service somewhere, so I just decided I'd put his slide up there. Nothing to do with what I'm talking about, but he's pretty cute. The time between Jesus' resurrection and his ascension into heaven was a kind of a limbo time like that, wasn't it? Like it was a limbo for Jesus because he'd finished his major work, he died on the cross, he'd risen again, and yet he had an ascension, a resurrection body, and yet here he was still on the earth. It was a limbo time for the disciples because they now understood the gospel and they knew what they had to do, and yet they didn't have the kind of power to do anything about it. Jesus was with them, but he wasn't planning to stay with them. And so it was a very unusual time in many ways. Bit of a weird time, really, isn't it? Jesus being on this earth in his resurrection body. Why didn't Jesus just go straight to heaven? Well, one of the reasons is Lex would have missed a lot of a series that he just preached sometime on the Great Commission. But why didn't he go straight to heaven? He obviously had some things that he needed to do. And one of those things was for people to understand the resurrection and what it was all about. Part of it was a calling, a Great Commission, a calling so that the disciples knew exactly what Jesus expected them to do. And partly it was some words to Peter that he wanted to tell Peter. And that's the words we're going to look at this morning in this sermon. In the limbo time, at least 7 of the now 11 disciples just started to go home. They left Jerusalem and went back up north to the place where they'd grown up, where they'd spent most of their time in ministry with Jesus, where their families were. And you can kind of understand that. There'd been a lot of tension, a lot of difficulties, a lot of issues, and so they were probably going home for a break, in a sense. They decided when they went back home to go fishing. They'd been fishermen, a lot of them had been fishermen, and so they decided they'd go out. They probably needed to eat too, and they didn't have wealthy women around them now supplying their needs. And so they decided that they had to go out and fish. And so they took the boat out at night, all 7 of the disciples, but they had no luck at all. Nothing. They caught nothing. All night they fished. Nothing. That's familiar to some of you, isn't it? You know what I mean? Like you fish for a long period of time and catch nothing. I must say that has never happened to me. I've never been fishing. I could say some things about that, but I don't want to offend anyone this early in the sermon, all right? In the morning, after working hard all night and catching nothing, they were kind of about 100 metres out from the shore. It was just starting to dawn, and this nosy guy on the shore yells out to them, and the question is in Greek, is in a negative form. So it's, "You haven't caught anything, eh?" And through the gloom, they peer at this guy and yell back, "No, nothing at all." He said, "Well, try the other side of the boat." Duh. Like, these are fishermen. Oh, there's no fish on this side, but there could be fish on the other side. We've never thought about that. Let's try the other side of the boat. Well, they decided for some reason that they'd try, threw the nets the other side and caught, the Bible says, 153 fish. They caught a huge haul of fish. And they realised, of course, immediately that the guy on the shore was Jesus. And he'd already risen from the dead. He'd already appeared a number of times to them. And now they were up north, and here he was appearing to them again. Peter jumps straight overboard, swims to the shore. The other guys are left to pull all the nets in with a huge haul of fish, finally get it to shore. And when they get there, Jesus is making a little barbecue for them on the shore. And they sit down and have breakfast with Jesus. As they sat around that fire that morning, there would have been a very strong sense of deja vu in them. Because the last time almost exactly the same thing had happened was 3 years ago or so. They'd been out all night, caught nothing all night. Next morning, Jesus had turned up. He taught a little bit from their boats, and then he says, let's go and catch something. And they said, no fish around. And sure enough, Jesus went out, they threw their nets in, caught this huge haul of fish, brought it into shore. And the upshot of all that, as you see in the passage right in the last verse, verse 11, the upshot of all that was Jesus said to them, okay, it's time to leave the fishing now and come and follow me, and you will be fishers of people, of men. Here they were doing almost exactly the same thing. Almost exactly the same. This is not accident here. There's something special going on. And as they sat around having barbecue breakfast with Jesus, I'm sure this is on their mind, that the last time they'd done it, when they'd pulled up the boats to the shore and left their nets, the last time they'd done it, Jesus had called them to follow him. And now they were, after 3 years, and almost exactly the same thing is happening. They would have been reflecting on those intervening times. What had happened between these two major events? For Peter, it had been a roller coaster ride. He'd had some fabulous times, some times with Jesus, some times of boldness, some times of speaking out the truth, some times of ministry where God had worked in power through him. There'd been some really, really exciting times. And some really terrible times too. Dumb stuff, he says, being accused by Jesus of speaking on behalf of Satan. Lots of mistakes, stupid comments, culminating with just a week or two before, that dreadful night that still sent shivers down his spine when Jesus was in desperate need and just needed his friends around him. And 3 times he fell asleep and couldn't pray when Jesus needed him most. And then a few hours later, 3 times, he denied even knowing Jesus when Jesus was led off to torture and death. And as he sat, I'm sure, around that fire that morning, this is weighing very heavily on Peter's mind. The original call of Jesus to follow him, and the excitement and the passion and the heart and the belief and the faith and the expectation of what was going to happen. And then the horror of that terrible night where, despite all his good intentions, he'd messed things up so badly that he'd given away, really, any chance of really making a difference for Jesus. He'd blown his opportunity. Those are the sorts of things you can't take back. He'd lost the right to lead, the calling to change lives, to fish for people that Jesus had asked him to do. We've all sat with Peter around that campfire, haven't we? Not literally. I mean, some of you, particularly those of you that are a little bit older, probably have sat around campfires at times. I remember when I was in a youth pastor, that was a long time ago, and we used to go off camping, we'd take a couple of hundred young people off camping, and it was fabulous. And we used to you could make big campfires in those days, and no one would worry, and we'd make big campfires. I remember one night sitting around this campfire, and we'd been singing songs, and I could play guitar back in those days, and we'd playing guitar and singing songs around this campfire, having a fabulous time. And then the atmosphere settles down, and I just put my guitar behind me and just relaxed and enjoyed it. And the guy next to me, a good mate, suddenly got a cramp in his leg. And he jumped up, and he bang, 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 straight through my guitar. Actually, I had fun with that guitar because I'd always wanted to smash a guitar. Do you know what I mean? There's something in you that thinks, I want to smash a guitar. And so I could then smash it after that. It was quite fun. I'm not talking about literally like that, although that may have happened. But I'm talking about that sense of, I'm just hopeless, aren't I? You know what I mean? Like I try and do some stuff for Jesus and he uses me at times, but basically when it comes to the crunch, I'm just pretty useless. It may be a major failure like Peter, and some of you are reflecting back and thinking of major failures in your life and you think, how on earth did I ever do that? How terrible, how dreadful. Or more likely, it's just a constant series of failures. Maybe just small things, but they just reinforce to you just how hopeless you are, how useless you are, how little ability you have to really serve God. I'm constantly reminded of that. It's interesting, this is a little while ago, but the Thursday night of Easter, which of course is exactly when this happened for Peter. The Thursday night of Easter, we were having quite a lot happening over the Easter weekend, and went down to the shops to buy some stuff with a million other people going down the shops on Easter Eve, and bought a few things, and got to the checkout with whatever I could grab. There was a lot missing, but whatever I could grab, got to the checkout, and the checkout chick, actually it was a checkout chap, as I went through, asked me, you know how they're trained to ask these questions, and you kind of wait for them. And the one for Easter was, what are you doing over Easter? And so I was coming through lots of groceries, racing home, and he said, what are you doing over Easter? Now, he couldn't care what I said. Do you know what I mean? Like, he wasn't listening to me at all. And I said, well, we're doing stuff with some friends. I didn't mention that I was going to church. I didn't mention that I was going to celebrate Jesus' death and resurrection. And I got home and I just kicked myself. Now, he didn't care what I said. But even in that situation, I couldn't even speak up for Jesus. Now, some of you would always say about Jesus at the checkout, but you know the feeling. Think, why am I so useless? Why am I so prone to failure? And that's exactly how Peter fell. He sits in this small circle this morning at the shore of the Sea of Galilee and wonders what his future is from here. Where does he go from here? What does he do? Remembering Jesus' promise about being a rock and realizing that his behavior has been everything but that. Remembering the enthusiasm with which he said, I'll be there. All these guys will desert you, Jesus, but I won't. I'll be there at the end. And wallowing in his failure and uselessness. And then Jesus fixes his eyes on Peter, and things are never the same again. And I want to have a quick look at this passage, and if you've got your Bibles there, you can turn to it. It'll be up on the screen as well. But John 21, verses 15 to 17, this is what Jesus says to Peter. When they'd finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my sheep. Now, I want to talk about a couple of technical things here, all right? Now, those of you that are really into Bible study and all the rest, this will be the best part of the sermon for you, all right? Okay? Others of you, you're kind of really looking for where this is going and what God's going to say. check your phone or something like that. Do you know what I mean? It's just going to be a short period, but I want to just deal with a couple of technical issues in this passage, and then we'll come back and look how it all works out. The first one is you note the formality of Jesus' address to Peter. Simon, son of John. Now, in those days, of course, people didn't have last names, so how did you distinguish this Simon from that Simon? Well, it was by their father. So Simon, son of John, was more or less their full name in a sense. So for me, it would be John Raymond Sweetman. You know, that's what Jesus was saying. Now, this was a Barbie, right? Breakfast Barbie. And here it was, Jesus was using full name. There's something quite out of keeping with the setting in Jesus' use of this. My middle boy, we've got 3 boys, and the middle boy is Alexander James Sweetman. Now, Alexander, he's a little boy. Well, he was very small growing up, and so Alexander kind of far too big a name. So we always used to call him Alex or Al a lot of the time. But there are a few times that I have used his full name, Alexander Sweetman or Alexander James Sweetman. One is occasionally, when he was growing up, I would say, Alexander Sweetman. You know what's coming next, don't you? He's in trouble for something. And it could be that Jesus is using Peter's full name, Simon, son of John, because he's in trouble, big trouble here. But we find that that's not the case. In fact, very much the opposite. The other time that I can remember using Alexander Sweetman was when I married Alex and Cass. And I said, Alexander Sweetman, etc., etc. And so we often use full names when it comes to more formal situations. We would perhaps at an ordination or something like that as well. And so this, something formal about this. I know it's a very informal setting, but there's something very formal going on here in this occasion. And it's repeated 3 times. 3 times he uses this full name. So there's something significant happening here. The second issue with the text is, the first question is, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Now the question is, what does more than these mean? More than what? Now there's a couple of possibilities here. Jesus could be asking, and all of these are possible from the Greek, right? Jesus could be asking, do you love me more than you love these guys? You know what I mean? You're back together as mates, you're going out fishing together. Jesus is sitting there with Peter and saying, Peter, do you love me more than these guys? Do you love these guys? That's a possibility with the Greek, probably fairly unlikely. A second possibility is he's asking, do you love me more than these things? In other words, you've gone back to fishing. This has been the thing that you've done all your life. It's what you know very well. It's what you enjoy doing, particularly when you catch as many fish as this. Do you love me more than this stuff? In other words, do you still have the same heart and passion to serve me and fish for people? Or is this really what you want to be doing now? And that could be a possibility. Do you love me more than these things? The third possibility is, do you love me more than these? Do you love me more than these guys love me? Now, initially, that sounds really strange, wouldn't it? Why would Jesus ask, do you love me more than these other blokes love me? Except for the fact that Peter had already made this promise. If all of these guys depart, I'm going to be there till the end. In other words, Peter's already said, Jesus, I don't know about these other blokes. You know, they're a bit wishy-washy, but I'm better than them. I'll be there to the end. And it may well be that Jesus is saying to Peter, are you still so cocksure of your love for me as you were back then? Do you love me more than these blokes love me? And it's interesting that Peter doesn't take that up in the response. He doesn't compare himself anymore with these other guys. And when Jesus asks the question again, he drops the idea of more than these. We get a different Peter now. This is a circumspect, a humble Peter here in this situation. The third thing is, and this is, if you've heard preaching on this, I'm sure you've heard mention of it, that there are 2 Greek verbs, words for love, that are used by Jesus in this as he says these things. Now, I just need to point out that Jesus actually, when he said them, was speaking in Aramaic, And this is recorded in Greek, all right? So already there's a translation going on here. But the two words, there's a couple of words, there's more than two, but there's two main words for love in the Greek, and one is phileo, which is a kind of a compassion, a care, a feeling of love towards someone. And the other one is agapeo, which is a commitment. I will love you, I will serve you, I will sacrifice for you, I will give myself to you. And so both of these words are used in this passage, and I've tried to distinguish them by using yellow and red or orange, whatever that is there. So the word love in yellow is the agapeo word, and the word love in the orange is the phileo word. Now, there's a couple of possibilities here. One is, and probably the most common interpretation that I've heard anyway, is that Jesus starts by asking Peter, do you love me? Do you agapeo, are you willing to lay down your life for me? Are you committed to me? Will you serve me? And this high level of love. And Peter now is only able to respond with phileo. Well, Jesus, I feel love towards you. I'm not making this big commitment anymore, but and in the end, Jesus drops to this other word. That's one possibility. The other possibility is to turn it around the other way. And Jesus asked Peter, do you love me, agapeo, which is, do you love me from your head? Do you know what I mean? Are you committed to me in your head? And Peter's saying, oh, Jesus, I love you from my heart. I'm passionate about you. I care deeply about you. It's not just here, it's down here as well. That's another possibility. The third possibility is it doesn't really make any difference. This is the one I prefer. And I'm along with Leon Morris. You probably don't know Leon Morris, but he's a great Australian evangelical scholar. He says that John, in fact, often in his gospel uses two words interchangeably that have the same sort of meaning and doesn't try and distinguish it. And already in the gospel, he's used these two words for love interchangeably. And the likelihood is that John is just, when you're writing something, I don't know how you do it, but when I'm writing things, I like to use different words. It just makes it a little bit different when you're reading it. And there's a fair chance our Greek lecturer says the same thing, so I'm good ground here, and I am principal of the Theological College as well. So anyway, if you really love some reason for the difference of them, you can stick with that, and that's fine as well. All right, I just wanted to deal with those technical things. Now we come back to what's really going on here. What's Jesus doing? What's so important about this dialogue for Peter? Let's pull it all together. All right, the setting. Right now, the setting is very much the same as Peter's original call. When Jesus called Peter and said, okay, I'm calling you to be fishers of people. Leave everything behind now and come and follow me. And this situation is almost exactly the same as that. So the setting is significant here. Secondly, there's the formality of it. We've gone into that. Formality's strange for friends having breakfast together. Something big is going down here with Jesus formally speaking to Peter. Then there's the repetition. 3 times Jesus asks the same question, and 3 times it gets the same response. Peter actually is hurt by the fact that Jesus asked him 3 times. It says that in verse 17. The 3rd time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the 3rd time. Peter thought Jesus didn't believe him. Couldn't be further from the truth. There's something happening here. As Peter had slept through 3 times, as he denied Jesus 3 times, so Jesus was asking him 3 times. There's something being restored here. There's something being changed here. There's something about grace that is touching this situation, that this broken guy that 3 times had done things wrong, now 3 times was being restored. And then there's the commission. Feed my lambs, feed my sheep, take care of my sheep. Again, probably the same sort of thing Jesus was saying. Bold, bumptious Peter is to be a rock of security for those who are hurting and struggling, the lambs, the sheep. The calling now is not just to fish, although that calling remains, but now also to feed. He's actually being extended in his leadership. It's not just an evangelistic message that he has, but also a teaching and a growing and a caring and a shepherding role that he's been called to take up as well. Fish and feed my sheep. Peter has been recommissioned here. His failure is gone. He's got a new start. And yes, this failure of a man is going to lead this church, this fledgling church. In a few weeks' time, this man that had denied knowing Jesus is going to stand up and filled with the Spirit, he's going to preach, and 3,000 people are going to respond to his first sermon. How's that for a broken failure? No matter what Peter's feelings of failure are, God has not finished with him. And Jesus partly stayed in this limbo time so that he could tell Peter this, that God had not finished with him, that God's grace was going to touch his life. And all that he dreamed of and all that Jesus asked him to be was still going to be fulfilled through his life and through his ministry. The past was not going to hold him back. He was getting a new start. This is so like Jesus, isn't it? So like Jesus. I see it again and again in my life. I see it in other people's lives. I grew up with a guy who was a fair bit older than me, a guy that I hugely respected, a very, very capable man. And he became a pastor and did some powerful things. I mean, God used him to do some great things. He grew a number of churches. Lots of people found Jesus. And then he had a major, major failure in his life. He had an adulterous sexual relationship with a lady in the church. And he was caught out, and it was just horrific. I was shocked about what had happened. And he, of course, was excluded from ministry and moved out of things. But he worked hard. He restored his relationship with his wife and his family. And he went bus driving, I think he did, and realised that that was all that he could really expect. Not that there's anything wrong with bus driving, but after having the call of God to ministry. But God in time restored him. And he went on to lead one of the biggest churches in Australia. And that's the great, incredible grace of God, that no failure is too great for God's grace to touch and to overcome. Your failure, your weakness, your slackness is not the end. You are not doomed to second best by your sin. Today is a day of restorations, of new beginnings, of recommissioning. But you do have to answer the question that Peter had to answer. Do you really love me? Do you really? And Jesus comes to us and formally, with our full name in a sense, John Raymond Sweetman, do you really love me? Come on, I'm asking you. Do you really love me? And sometimes it's more than this, more than your half-hearted friends, or more than the things that you've accumulated and have. Do you love me more than all this? Do you really love me? And this has nothing to do with becoming a pastor, a vocational worker or something like that. This is to do with achieving all that God wants to do in and through our lives, wherever that might be. Jesus comes to me this morning and comes to you and says, do you truly love me? Forget the past. I'm asking you now. I have work for you to do, but do you love me? And before you respond to that, you need to weigh up the cost of the answer to that question. Because Peter 3 times says, I love you, I love you, I love you. And Jesus immediately goes on and says something. What does he say? This is in verse 18. Jesus said, feed my sheep at the end of verse 17. And then verse 18, I tell you the truth. When you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you're old, you will stretch out your hands. And someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which people would glorify God. Then he said to him, follow me. It's interesting, isn't it? Right in the middle of this wonderful moment of grace. beautiful moment where Peter's being restored again. Jesus says, you've got to realize the cost of this. If you say, yes, you really love me, you really are going to follow me, then you've got to know, Peter, that it's not going to end up physically well for you. It's going to end up with you being martyred the way I was martyred. Peter's response is beautiful, isn't it? No big claims, no grandiose statements. Just a simple and humble, Jesus, you know my heart. You know how strong my love is for you. I have messed things up, yes, but my love is as deep as it ever was. He didn't waver under the continuing questioning of Jesus. 3 times Jesus asked him. 3 times the same response. Jesus, you know my heart. You know I love you. There's many people here this morning, I know that this is a beautiful church with a beautiful heart and passion. And there's many of you that would just again say this morning, Jesus, you know that I love you. I know that I don't do everything the way I wish I could, but you know, Jesus, I love you. I really, really do. I really do want to follow you. I do really want to serve you. I want to see everything that you want to do through my life. I really do. But for some of you this morning, this is a time of recommissioning, of restarting. You've felt that your failure is holding you back from being all that God would have you be. You feel inadequate. You feel useless. You feel restricted by your sin. And Jesus comes and says, that doesn't have to be. If I can give Peter a new start, I can give you a new start. And he says, I am going to do that this morning. But you must answer the question, do you love me? A new call is coming to serve others, to fish and to feed. Don't let this opportunity go. Let's pray together. Lord, we stop at this moment and in wonder of your grace. A grace that takes broken, sinful, useless people like Peter, that promises were much greater than what they could ever do. And a grace that sees through the external failures and problems and difficulties to look at the heart. Man looks at the outward appearance. God looks at the heart. And you looked into the heart of this broken man, and you knew it was good, Jesus. You knew it was good. And you restored, Lord. And you look into our hearts here this morning, Lord, and you see the good hearts here. Not perfect hearts by any means, surrounded by lots of brokenness, but inside is this passion and heart to love you more than anything else. We genuinely love you, Jesus. We really do. And I pray, dear Jesus, that as you look at our hearts, that everything that you dreamed and planned for us will be fulfilled, Lord. Use us. We know that's a costly business saying use us. We love you, Jesus. But there's no better way to live our lives. It's the way we want to live it, Lord. So we say yes to you. Take us and use us, Lord. Empower us. Fill us with your Spirit. We leave the past behind. We move forward, Jesus, to all that you would call us to be in faith, not listening to the condemnation of Satan, but listening to your words of promise and grace. Feed my lambs, fish and feed. I will use you. We hold on to this promise this morning, dear Jesus. In your name, amen.